Dear world, we need to talk. Welcome to Doha Debates, where we are searching for solutions to global challenges.
The world continues to fight the spread of coronavirus.
You must stay at home.
We are going somewhere new. This is an unprecedented crisis.
Today is a wake-up call for all of us. It's a reset button.
Real aspiration. It's called socialism.
Just simply government of the people, by the people, and for the people.
The future does not belong to those who believe in socialism.
Imagine this, a just world with no hunger, clean water for all, shelter, and a real bed for all children. A world with healthcare for everyone, decent work for decent wages, a world free of injustice and exploitation, where human capital is at the center, not financial capitalism. Has COVID-19 finally exposed capitalism as a predatory system benefiting only the most powerful? Or is it leveling the playing field? Is it forcing us to rethink our systems, pushing us towards the ideals of socialism, equity instead of exploitation, human dignity and compassion instead of individualism and greed? This is our debate.
Please welcome your Doha Debates moderator, Ghida Fakry.
Hello and welcome to our first virtual Doha Debates. The pandemic has indeed changed our world dramatically. In just 4 months, faster than wars or ideological fights, it has laid bare the inequities of our societies, their fragilities, so much so that today many young people are going back to basics. They demand a just world, a compassionate system. They see socialism as the new answer to an old economic system that has simply failed them. In many capitalist societies, we've seen an emergency socialism with stimulus packages to face the pandemic, universal basic income, and employee retention schemes. COVID-19 serves as a vivid reminder that the state, the government, is capable of providing social safety nets, of mitigating the shortcomings of capitalism and its worst injustices. Today, we will have an online audience. We will also be joined by all of our voting panel, and they will be joining us as well via live stream. You can all, in fact, watch this program, this debate, on Facebook and on Twitter and on YouTube. We are counting on your vigorous participation and our voting panels as well. But to start us off, let's go straight to our correspondent, Nelufar, who will tell us everything you need to know about how to get engaged.
Thank you, Ghida. Yes, we are extremely excited about this virtual debate. And as ever, it is important for you to get in touch because you can shape the debate that we are about to have. As ever, our social handle is Doha Debates. Get on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, wherever, and have your say. Put your questions to our speakers. Make sure that you get your comments read out on air, as I will be doing shortly. Use that hashtag #DearWorld, and we will be easily able to find your comments as the show progresses. Ghida.
Thank you very much indeed, Nelufar, and we will be, of course, looking forward to that. But let me now introduce our speakers. With us today, 3 people who have very different perspectives on our topic. And they are Fatima Bhutto. But in fact, before we go to this, let me tell our viewers, Nelufar, a little bit about what we're actually talking about.
Could the global pandemic make the world more socialist? Inequality has become rampant in recent years. Tax rates for the rich have fallen dramatically since the 1980s, and the world's richest 10% owns 85% of the wealth. Meanwhile, 810 million people, that's more than 10% of the world's population, don't have enough to eat. With all this inequality in stark relief, governments around the world are turning to socialist solutions. Socialism has often carried a stigma. It can be associated with communism, where there's no private business or property. Everything is owned and distributed by the state, which has often led to authoritarianism. But socialism is said to be a bit more of a flexible ideology with many shades of grey. It often means the state has significant control over distributing wealth to the people, but in many cases, the government is democratically elected. Social democracies already exist in places in Europe like Norway and Sweden. They rely on high taxation to pay for services for everyone. Things like university tuition, childcare, and healthcare. But let's be clear, countries governed in this way are still capitalist. Private business has just been tamed with more regulation and taxation. As COVID-19 ravages economies across the world, we're seeing what could be called pandemic socialism. In Pakistan, the government is giving 900 million in cash to millions of the country's poorest families. It's the largest economic social intervention in the country's history. The German government is subsidizing 60 to 67% of lost wages to 11.7 million people who are furloughed or had their hours reduced, and much of Europe has taken similar measures. So what happens next? Will world leaders take the lessons that they have learnt through these socialist policies forward, or will they go away when the virus does?
So then, are we in a new era of pandemic socialism? Have we moved beyond that stigma associated with socialism in many parts of the world? Where do we draw the line between socialism and capitalism, between a free market, winner-takes-all system and collectivism that in fact prioritizes care for everyone? We'll be exploring this and much more with our guests, and they are Fatima Bhutto, a writer and novelist from Pakistan, Tabata Amaralu, a Brazilian congresswoman and education activist, and Lord Hague, a former British Foreign Secretary and former leader of the Conservative Party. It's great to have you all with us at this debate. Thank you all for being here. We'll also be joined a little later in the program by our connector, Govinda Clayton. Govinda, as always, great to see you as well. But for now, let's go straight to our guests.
Our first speaker, Fatima Bhutto, is an author, novelist, and commentator. She descends from the Pakistani political dynasty. Her books have been longlisted for the Women's Prize and the DSC Prize for South Asian Literature.
Today, the world is the richest that it has ever been, and yet we are beset by a raging systemic inequality. Even before the COVID-19 crisis, according to Oxfam, 10,000 people died every single day due to lack of affordable healthcare. In May, the Maltese armed forces turned back a boat of migrants at gunpoint. Malta is small, they told the people stranded at sea, and we cannot take you. But for $1 million investment in Malta, Malta will take you. Suddenly, there is space then. Recently, the United States bought up the world's supply of the drug remdesivir, the first drug approved to treat COVID-19. The US bought 500,000 doses, which effectively means that no other country on earth will be able to buy the drug for the next 3 months. Capitalism's predation knows no bounds, and it's not held back by our current emergencies. In fact, they're pretty profitable. Gilead, the company that makes remdesivir, will be selling the treatment for $3,200 a course. It costs approximately $10 to make. Kianga Yamada Taylor, an academic and activist, says you cannot have untold obscene wealth without untold obscene poverty. That is the law of capitalism. A letter written to argue for the eventual COVID vaccine to be free to everyone on Earth was published in May and had not a single sitting Western head of state as a signatory. Our world is broken beyond repair, and capitalism doesn't work the way it's advertised. More and more people the world over see socialism as an alternative to this very broken system and are calling for healthcare to be a human right. They're calling for the cancellation of debt for poor countries, for guaranteed education, housing, and wages for all, and for the defunding of the police so that hundreds of millions of dollars spent on punitive systems that don't work can go back into the future of our communities. It is time to radically rethink and reimagine our world.
Our second speaker, Tabata Amaralu, is a federal congresswoman in Brazil. She grew up on the peripheries of Sao Paulo and graduated from Harvard University. She's an activist for education and women's rights.
Countries around the world are now facing a serious health crisis, which has been amplifying all the socioeconomic problems that already existed. In Brazil, this is no different. As polarization increases, people tend to see economic growth and social development as opposite goals, when in reality, both things must and do go hand in hand. When we look at our problems rationally and the evidence of what works, we find out that we need to combine the ideals of both capitalism and socialism. The main goal of each country must be to end poverty and reduce social inequalities, because we know they stem from unequal opportunities. When the competition to achieve our goals is unfair, as it is now, people have the right to dream limited. In the last centuries, capitalism, in association with scientific and technological innovation, has revealed itself as the best producer of wealth as well as of solutions to combating diseases and hunger. In capitalism, people are free to think, the economy is dynamic, and the solutions creative. Yet, capitalism requires regulation for the competition to be fair. In addition, the tendency of unruly capitalism is to increase inequality, with the rich growing richer much faster than the poor. Capitalism requires a redistribution system and a welfare state. People cannot prosper without food and on minimal conditions. Effective public health and education systems must be created and strengthened in every country. Basic income, which is back to the agenda because of the COVID-19 pandemic, is a good example of a policy that combines the ideals of both capitalism and socialism, allowing people to meet their basic needs with the freedom to choose what they need the most. In a free society, we are better able to find the solution. In a just society, these solutions can reach everybody.
Our third speaker, Lord Hague, is a former British Foreign Secretary and former Conservative Party leader. He's written several political biographies and has a weekly column in the Daily Telegraph.
Hello, everybody. The world faces a massive problem after COVID-19. Millions of jobs are being destroyed. There's a slow economic recovery. There's a tragic impact on young people in particular all over the world. And there's a great danger that governments will be doing so much in our lives that they will never stop interfering afterwards, that they'll be trying to tell every one of us how to live and every business how to be run. What we really need now is a new age of innovation, of new ideas, of entrepreneurs, of people who are prepared to take risks to find new solutions. To combat climate change, we need new technologies. To improve healthcare, we need new vaccines and medical treatments. To create jobs, we need people to be rewarded for creating jobs, not attacked with new laws and new taxes. We need someone to create the Apples and the Amazons and the Googles and the Microsofts of the future, not try to reinvent the Soviet Union. We need more Silicon Valleys. We need more startups that push the boundaries of science, not committees of politicians trying to do these things, because they will fail. They should never be given too much power, because remember, when the government is big enough to give you everything you want, it's also big enough to take it all away. We do have to address inequality of wealth in the world, but the answer is equal opportunity, not holding people back. Think of a country like Singapore with great prosperity created by allowing businesses to thrive. What a contrast with Venezuela, reduced to poverty by socialism and making businesses unwelcome. So we need more innovation, enterprise, and freedom for a new generation, and less socialism, so that generation can use their talents to the full. Thank you very much.
And thank you to all our speakers for their insights and perspectives, three very distinct, clear positions. And here's a quick summary of what we just heard. Fatima Bhutto says we need to radically reimagine our current systems, which are broken, she says, beyond repair. Tabata Amaralu says we need to look beyond the labels of socialism and capitalism, and we need to make policies that are based on evidence. William Hague says we need less socialism. We must indeed foster innovation and entrepreneurship instead in order to move ahead. Now, you heard their arguments. We want to hear from our voting panel and see what they think. Our virtual audience that is watching the debate with us today will be voting on all three statements. And here's how it works.
It's time to vote. We need your input to find common ground among the speakers. We want to know exactly how much value you attach to the arguments you've heard. You have a total of 100 points to divide. You can divide them over 1, 2, or all three statements. To do so, simply assign points to the statements on a sliding scale.
And so while members of our voting panel consider what they've just heard and try to make up their minds, please join the debate by using the hashtag #DearWorld at Doha Debates. You can send us your questions, your comments, and suggestions. Do you think that education and healthcare should be free for everyone around the world? Would you be willing yourselves to pay higher taxes so that everyone can live a decent life? Or is the allure of capitalism and wealth accumulation too tempting for you? Now, while you're sharing your thoughts, let's go straight back to Nelufar and see what reactions we're getting online. Nel, what are you saying?
I have to say, as the debates have gone on, it's always interesting to see how polarizing a certain issue might be. And this idea of socialist policies is definitely getting people riled up. I'm just going to read you a few of the comments we've been getting on Twitter with people using that hashtag #DearWorld and also tweeting us at Doha Debates. Ogava Ondego in Nairobi, Kenya says, at this junction, it does no harm to try out these strategies. Any useful strategy Ogava is up for. Pete Salmon says, we won't be having this situation permanently. Socialism may work in this very rare situation, but I don't think socialism can be approved for the long run. It's not too often that pandemic-led lockdowns take place. And very finally, Emerson Leandro in Venezuela, a very interesting country. I hope we talk about it with the speakers soon, says, as a Venezuelan, the mere mention of socialism gives me pause. How about saying social justice policies? How about saying social safety net? Anything but reminders of the atrocities committed on my family in the name of socialism. That's really interesting to hear. I want to show the voting panel because they are indeed having their say and voting for all of us. If we can see our virtual audience there, they all are. I'm sure you're all nodding with me. It was all very useful information that you just heard from our speakers. It's great to see you. Please continue to vote. But you guys have been having your say on our social media as well. Over on Instagram, you guys have been answering our polls that we've been running. Some of the questions that we've asked have yielded these results, Ghida, and I hope that our speakers could talk to this. We asked, would you support permanently raising taxes on the rich? 76% said yes. We asked, would you support universal basic income in your country? 75% said yes. And then we asked, is your country doing enough to ensure everyone has had adequate housing? 27% said enough. The problem isn't that socialism as an idea might be contentious. What people really want to understand is the practical implications of what socialist policies can achieve and, importantly, who's going to pay for it. Ghida, back to you.
Indeed, a lot of very interesting questions, a polarizing issue as well, as you say. We'll get to some of the questions that the audience has, but for now I'm told the results of the voting are in. So let's see how much we can agree on whether our future should be more socialist or whether socialism should be avoided at all costs. So let's take a look at these results. The position that was put forward by Fatima Bhutto on the left, dare I say, we need to radically reimagine our current system, is the one that seems to have echoed the most with members of our voting panel. It stands at almost 45%. It's followed by Tabata's perspective that we need to look beyond these simple labels of socialism and capitalism. 37% of our voting panel agree with Tabata, and William Hague is at the bottom there with a lot of work to do to convince the skeptics amongst our audience and voting panel that we need less socialism. So these are the results for now. Will the votes change after our speakers have had the chance to elaborate a little more on their positions? We'll also be bringing in some of your thoughts and questions, so do keep those coming as well.
Welcome to the Majlis, a traditional Arab consensus-building practice. The focus of the Majlis is to welcome critical conversations and reach solutions. Ghida will encourage our speakers to bridge differences and find common ground.
William Hague, let me go to you first. You heard Fatima there say that capitalism isn't working as advertised. We've seen a trend around the world, young people actually developing quite a negative view of capitalism today. In the United States, where I live, the word capitalism, which was until recently taboo, has now got a lot of people drawn to it. In fact, 7 out of 10 millennials say they would vote for a socialist candidate, yet here you are. And since you were 16, you've been railing against socialism. For sure, you've been consistent, but can you understand how, in today's world, in 2020, young people are being drawn toward socialism and social justice?
Oh, yes, I can certainly understand that. And I can see from your poll that I've got work to do in this discussion. I can understand that. And I think there's a lot of work to do to reduce inequality in the world. There's a lot of work to do to stop havens. There's a lot of work to do on the environment. For instance, I would strongly favor a global carbon tax. That would be a key building block of addressing climate change. And I agree with a lot of what Tabata said about combining the best elements of capitalism with regulation. Of course, that is all necessary. But we do have to remember that in the last 40 years, hundreds of millions of people have been lifted out of poverty in the world, that the world taken as a whole has the best healthcare, the longest lifespans that we've ever seen in history. The race is on to develop vaccines and medical treatments at the moment in COVID-19, and we would never have been able in previous decades to develop things as quickly as they are being developed now. So we're seeing some of the advantages here of how the world has developed without saying that it's perfect. And I think the common ground in this debate might be, yes, a lot of reform and change is needed in the world, but you still have to be able to be rewarded for running a good business, for employing people, for coming up with a great idea. And the trouble with socialism, as we saw in Venezuela, that was mentioned in one of the people who just contributed, is that if you stop all that, well, you end up running out of everything. You ended up in Venezuela not even having enough toilet paper. This is a socialist society.
Well, you take the example of Venezuela, William. You take the example of Venezuela, but closer to you, closer to home, you've got social democracies in Europe. You've got Sweden and other Scandinavian countries that have done very well with this hybrid system of following certain social policies. They've got a welfare state, they have a market economy, but they also have strong social safety nets, free education and healthcare, and they rank among the happiest places on earth.
They're great
What's wrong with a bit of socialism?
We here in
then?
Britain, where I am sitting, we have free education and free healthcare. We have a national health service. That's not socialism. And I think one of the problems in this debate, of course, is defining what we mean by socialism. In Norway and Sweden, they would say they are social democratic, as you just said, not socialist societies. And of course, many people would say that here in Britain, that there's a strong social model. So I am in favor of free education and free healthcare for everybody in Britain and everybody in the world. I am saying don't cripple the growing businesses of the world and the future entrepreneurs with taxation and with unaffordable commitments. You know, universal basic income people have talked about, and you can understand the appeal of that, a basic income for everybody in the country or the world. But then who pays for it in the end? Who pays for it is you have to.
You talk about education being
so
free, and we know about the crushing student debts
people.
in many parts of the world. You talk about education being free, but we know about the crushing student debt, not everywhere, but in many places in the world. Fatima, let me turn to you, because you heard William Hague there take on some kind of, it seems, selective socialism. Yes, free healthcare, yes, free education. We hear people on the right also often raise the specter of Stalinism and the Soviet Union when we talk about socialism. But is what we are talking about something quite fundamentally different? Social equity, more equitable societies? And what do you say to people on the right who believe that people like you, in fact, are too idealistic and live in a utopian world?
Oh, I don't think we're utopian at all. I think what we're asking for is very basic. You know, Venezuela is always mentioned, and what's always left out of the conversation are the crushing sanctions that are put against Venezuela. Leaving that aside, Singapore is, of course, a wonderful place, and it has many great opportunities, but I wouldn't call it the freest place on earth if we're talking about the right to express opinions. I think when we talk about the danger here, it's the fact that Jeff Bezos made something like $35 billion during the pandemic. His personal fortune increased by $35 billion in 3 months. But at the same time, Amazon workers are paid $15 an hour. During the pandemic, their salary was raised $2 and then cut after 3 months. That's not a fair system. So I don't think we're saying let's all go out and be Stalinists. I think we're saying that labor must be rewarded for its work, and it's not being rewarded. Jeff Bezos is being rewarded incredibly handsomely, but Amazon workers and warehouses are not. They're getting fired when they complain
some might
about
argue
unfair working conditions. Sorry?
Some might argue that Jeff Bezos has indeed earned his billions. I mean, could you imagine living in a world without Amazon, without the billionaires, the entrepreneurs of this world? That Jeff
Sure,
Bezos
I can.
is in this world?
We live
I mean,
in a world
they fill
without
an important
Jeff Bezos
vacuum, don't they?
and without Amazon. But I think what's important here, Ghida, is that the fact that even if we look at America, which is the richest country in the world, and it's always held up as a paragon of capitalist success, this is a country that really is built on the enslavement of people. So it's not fair to say socialism has atrocities done in its name and not capitalism. Capitalism has awful things done in its name. And we know that America is the richest country in the world. It doesn't guarantee its people food. It doesn't guarantee its people shelter. It doesn't guarantee its people healthcare. It has the lowest infant mortality and life expectancy among rich countries in the world. So it's clear that capitalism has a very long way to go. And I don't think it's fair to say, you know, oh, millennials are utopian. Millennials want social justice, as the viewer from Venezuela said. Call it what you like. You don't have to call it socialism. But it's a system in which people have the right to a dignified life, where they are not men turned into machines.
All right, well, let's bring in Tabata. Tabata, you sit somewhere in the middle there. You consider yourself towards the left center of the political spectrum. You heard William say that governments are never going to stop interfering if we allow them to. He warns, and he's always warned, about what he calls the torment of socialism and socialist policies. Now, you live in a country with a right-wing political leadership, a country that has had its failed experience with socialist governments. And yet it is a country that has been so hard hit by this pandemic, 8 million people losing their jobs in just 2 months, and very dire circumstances, upwards of 80,000 people having died already from COVID-19. How do young people in Brazil and in the region look at this discussion? Do they favor socialism, having also experienced the negative sides of it? Or do they look towards entrepreneurship and more empowerment for the youth?
First of all, I'm 100% against any authoritarian regime. I don't care if it comes from the left or the right. I know that we are today in Brazil under a president who is authoritarian, and my country is suffering much more than was needed because of Bolsonaro. But that doesn't make me to like Maduro. Venezuelans are suffering a lot as well because of his authoritarianism. And I wanted to shift the debate to another point. Coronavirus brought an important debate about our political and economic systems, but everyone, regardless of where they are in the ideological spectrum, are anxious about a vaccine. And we are all waiting for it. And the vaccine are going to come, all the vaccines are going to come from the scientists. And when you look into the data, all the evidence shows that we need capitalism because of its freedom, because of the incentives for technological innovations to thrive. But if we don't do anything, who knows if the vaccines are going to get to everyone? So what I mean is that we need the freedom, we need the incentives. But once we have all these goods, they need to be distributed because it might take too much time for the poor to have any chance in this competition.
We all need a vaccine, as you say, Tabata. But William Hague, is it fair to say that a vaccine that, as Fatima pointed to, might cost just $10 to produce, in fact, is then sold at thousands of dollars? Isn't this the example of capitalism's predation, as Fatima put it?
No, I think the example is what we're doing here in the UK. As everyone will know, Oxford University is one of the leaders in trying to develop a vaccine. They're producing some of the results of their test today. They're working with a big business, with AstraZeneca, to do that. And what will happen if they are successful is that would be available on the National Health Service, that vaccine here in the United Kingdom, to everybody for free. Right? So that's the position of a society like the UK, which is not a socialist society. And the United Kingdom government is giving hundreds of millions of dollars internationally to promote vaccine development that would then help to distribute a vaccine if we produce it here globally. Now, that's the combination that Tabata's talking about of capitalist business working to develop a vaccine with government regulation and intervention. That's certainly what I believe in. Britain is not a socialist society, but everybody will have a vaccine if we invent a vaccine. Nobody will have to pay for it. So I don't agree with the criticism made by Fatima.
Listening to the two of you, and I'm really honored to be here with you, I don't think you are very far away from what I was saying, because yes, the two of you think that we need more just society. And I don't think Fatima would like to, I don't know how to say that, but to live in a society where you are not free to speak. And when you think about Venezuela, freedom of speech has gone. It's not there anymore. So maybe we could agree that we like freedom and socialism. When we look into the past, maybe we can think about something different. But you had to give up your freedom to be in that system. So maybe we can find something in the middle of the way in which, yes, our societies must be just. We need to fight for that. But we don't need to open up our right to freedom of speech, as an example.
Well, if I can jump in here, I would say...
Okay, go ahead. Fatima, jump in and give us your sense about what William was just saying, that in fact you do need the incentives that you have embedded in a capitalist society in order to achieve some of the things we're looking for, like a vaccine.
Well, I would just go back just a step just to say that I don't think it's fair to say that we are willing to give up our freedom of expression or anything. I mean, it's my very night is expressing myself. So I believe very deeply in freedom to do that. But I think it's not correct to say that democracies or capitalist societies don't restrict that too. If we look at the case of India today, the largest so-called democracy on earth, we see very much that the government of Narendra Modi is arresting his critics. They're using the COVID crisis to do that. There are limits to what you can say. Students who are protesting on the street of Delhi are arrested on sedition charges. It's not just Venezuela, and I think it's dangerous to limit ourselves to Venezuela. Freedom of expression is something people fight for every single day in capitalist societies too. Of course, we all agree that we want people to be innovative and to compete. I think the thing I'm trying to say on my side of the debate is that to me it's absolutely unjust that every single year 100 million people go into poverty in the race to pay for healthcare. The vaccine should be free. We know very much from this pandemic, which seems to ebb and flow in frightening ways, that unless everyone has this vaccine, none of us will be safe. So I agree with that. I just don't think that the system of capitalism as it prevails today is the best system for anything anymore. We've seen how unequal it is. We see that today in 2020, the people facing starvation have gone up to almost 250 million people. Something is not right there, and that's not Venezuela's fault by itself.
Right, and you bring in an important point, Fatima. Let me put this to William Hague, because it isn't just people living in the non-capitalist societies of this world that are struggling. Looking at the fate of millennials, the anxiety that the situation induces in them currently, the mental health state of so many millennials who are struggling to make ends meet. It's all very well and good to say to them, go off and become entrepreneurs, but the reality is very different. You look at the situation in the richest country in the world, the United States, and 1 in 5 millennials lives in poverty. Social mobility for young people has plummeted. Most of them can only dream of owning homes. In fact, a lot of people here will face 300% more student debt than their parents' generation. So not a very rosy picture for a lot of young people in capitalist societies, William Hague.
Well, this is a very important issue, and the biggest impact of COVID-19, economic impact, is on young people losing jobs and losing job opportunities. I call it Generation C, the COVID generation, after the millennials and Generation Z. And that means we do have to intervene. Yes, here in Britain, the government is paying for many more apprenticeships and subsidizing employers to take on young people. That's not socialism, that's just sensible support for getting those people into work. And I'm not saying they must all turn into entrepreneurs in the future, but they do have to have the opportunity to work for the entrepreneurs of the future. That's the way you actually create the jobs. Most jobs that are created for young people, certainly in European countries, are created by small businesses. So you want people the incentives to get involved, to start up a business. And unless they can do that, you don't create the jobs for the future. Where was the lowest
how can they do that when they face all these debts? Don't more entrepreneurs mean more debt?
Britain and America.
William, don't more entrepreneurs mean more debt? Don't they get trapped in this debt cycle? And quite often, a cycle of failure. Let's face it, not many of them end up being a Jeff Bezos. And we do know that the big companies of this world, Google, Apple, they've also benefited hugely from government-funded investments.
Of course they benefited from government funding investment, but their technologies have changed the way the whole works, and we need a new wave of such technologies in the future. Why did the Cold War end the way it did, with the technological superiority as well as the freedom of the Western world? That was because a capitalist system was inherently more productive of those things than socialism is. And we do need to protect people. You know, I agreed with what Fatima said earlier about the wages that people work for. That's why we need minimum wages. And again, here in the UK, we've been quite aggressively raising the minimum wage. So there is more common ground, actually, as Tabata was saying earlier, between all of us, I think, because we all want to see social justice. And we all want to see the benefits of economic growth and businesses doing well and jobs for young people. But it would be a great error to think governments and socialism can provide that in the future.
You will.
So is there more common ground? Go ahead, Tabata.
Very quick. I think we need to go beyond a minimum wage. We need to start speaking about basic income, with something that economists from both the left and the right have been defending, especially when we see other technological revolution that our countries are going through. We need to talk about basic income. And just one thing, what bothers me about Venezuela is not that it's on the right or the left. What bothers me about Venezuela, India, Hungary, and even Trump and Bolsonaro to a lesser degree is that you don't have freedom in these countries as you used to have in the past. So that's why we are fighting so hard in Brazil to not let Bolsonaro do what is being done in Hungary, because when you have a society in which you are not free to speak, you cannot fight for this just society that we have been speaking about here.
All right, I do want to talk specifics and universal basic income, but before that, I want to just see and explore how much common ground we actually have. It's a good time then to bring in our connector.
Dr. Govinda Clayton is a senior researcher in peace processes within the Center for Security Studies at ETH Zurich. Dr. Clayton's research interests include negotiation, mediation, conflict management, and civil war. As our connector, Dr. Clayton will provide guidance on identifying common ground and steering towards bridge building and consensus.
Govinda, you've had some tough ones in the past. Is this looking easier? William Hague just said there's quite a bit of common ground already. How much of a collision course are we on?
Thanks a lot, Ghida. Wow, what a fantastic discussion. So first of all, I want to give a virtual high five to Tabata for the bridge building role she's already been trying to perform throughout the debate. And I think all three of the speakers have actually highlighted various important elements of commonality. So what I'd really like to do is kind of build on some of those points. And I think one of the key things to stress here is the problems that we have when trying to find common ground associated with politicized or stigmatized terms. And here, clearly, this is the case with the word socialism. And so while there's lots of agreements when it comes to specific policies across each of our different speakers, when it comes to the use of socialism or capitalism, we instantly kind of hit a brick wall. So I'd really like to encourage us to kind of drop the use of that term for the rest of the debate and speak a little bit more specifically. And so here, there's kind of two particular areas that I think would be useful. Firstly, in what way or what should the goals be of economic policies or economic reforms in this period? Because there might be some differences, but it also seems like there's some important commonalities across each of our speakers. And secondly, with regard to the specific policies, we've heard each of our speakers talk about education, about the welfare state, about the need for certain regulations. So I think if we spoke into the specifics here, we'd actually find much more commonalities across each of our speakers than focusing on the broad labels of socialism.
All right, so let's focus on some of these issues. Thanks so much, Govinda. Let's explore some of what Govinda just mentioned, and in fact, pick up from where we left off with Tabata. So to you, William Hague, research published just recently in the last couple of months showed that 72% of Britons, in fact, favour the introduction of a jobs guarantee. In other words, the government providing work for anyone who needs it. More than half the population, 51%, back the idea of universal basic income. Do you support this idea?
Well, that's two different ideas that you're putting to me there. One is a guaranteed job for everybody, and another is a universal basic income. The idea of that is to pay whether people have a job or not. And there have been very good arguments put in favor of a universal basic income. There have been quite a few experiments with it as well. For instance, Finland recently ran an experiment in one part of the country, testing out whether it worked. And now the problem is always that if the universal basic income is at a sufficiently high level to allow people to maintain a good standard of living, you really have to tax everybody else very heavily. And then that has the problems that I was talking about earlier. So I don't support it. I do support minimum wages, and I do support the sort of schemes we're promoting in Britain now to get people back into work, paying companies to have apprenticeships. We have a new Kickstart scheme where businesses get an additional subsidy if they take on young people into work for a work placement. I support all of those, but I don't support a universal basic income which ends up with such heavy taxation that if you're trying to start that small business and invent that new high-tech company, well, then you don't have the incentive to do it.
Fatima, William there, you just heard, believes that left-wing politicians and thinkers will often advance agendas that support unaffordable ideas like universal basic income. Is this sheer fear-mongering, or do you believe he's got a legitimate concern there?
I don't presume to speak to the case of the United Kingdom, which obviously William has a lifetime of experience in. But I find it always uncomfortable, and I think a lot of young people find it uncomfortable today that asking for quite basic rights like healthcare, like the right to work, is considered fear-mongering. I think that what young people are asking for today is something that has been denied. Of course, it will be difficult. Of course, one has to come up with solutions that appeal to everybody. But isn't that the role of government? The role of government is not to wait for a pandemic before they can put in progressive ideas, but to already be working at that, to already be listening to advice, to be listening to what young people want. And I think this is what young people want. To ignore it is a dangerous thing. We are talking about countries that have found ways to pay for wars. They found ways to launch invasion after invasion, to make nuclear weapons, to do all kinds of things. I think they can come up with a way to guarantee work for all the citizens that are ready and able to work.
Tabata, your thoughts. You talked about universal basic income, but is it here to stay? Brazil, I believe, is the only country in the world that passed a law, in fact, in 2004 on universal basic income.
And that was a socialist.
We still don't have a universe. We have different words here. We had a president who was from the left. We don't have a universal basic income, but we have one that impacts millions of families. And right now we are doing this whole movement to have a basic income that will impact over half of the families in Brazil. And it costs between 5 to 10% of our GDP. Again, that's something that our country can do if we are really committed to end poverty and reduce inequality. And just 2 points to what William said. Your country is going to suffer from the technological revolution, the robotization of the economy much faster than my country, because you are a little bit up in that ladder. And it won't be so easy for people to find jobs, at least in the short run. So that's why it's so important for us to change our mentality and build the solution that's more connected to the future. Liberals such as Friedman have defended the basic income, because how is it possible for someone to survive and to strive, to have thoughts and to have ideas and to innovate and to be an entrepreneur if they don't have if they don't have money to buy food and to buy all those things that are so basic to their lives? So when we talk about basic income, for me, you are able to support that with the ideas from both the left and the right, because people have the freedom to choose what they can buy, they can participate in the economy, and they are not starving. They can access education, they can access health, so they can actually contribute for the state to generate more and more wealth. So for me, the three of us agree on a basic income. And again, I only know the calculus for my country because that's my job, but in Brazil, we can do it with less than 10% of our GDP. And we use our money such less useful ways, such as leaving taxes of a lot of companies because of their historical laws. And I'm sure that you would also be able to find the sources of income for your country as well.
Can I just ask a question about Brazil's example? Because we've been talking about Venezuela throughout this conversation, but I'm just curious about Lula's government. Were there not strides made in terms of, as you were just saying, Tabata, about income and right to education and vaccinations, or was that not the case?
So Brazil is one of the most unequal countries in the world up to this day. And even though we had some progress in the past with reducing inequality, things are a little bit worse right now. Not only because of Bolsonaro, but because we were hit by a very strong economic crisis before coronavirus. So things are very bad here now. And I think that the answer to our situation is education. Even though we were able to lift some people out of extreme poverty in the past, we have an education system that fails to give any opportunities to people. And even today, right after this debate, I'm going to Congress because we're going to fund we are going to vote a very important bill on education funding, and our government is against it. So things are a little bit more complicated here.
Sure.
I have to just jump in here because we're running slightly out of time for this segment of our program. But the issue, the centrality of education, as you said, Tabata, and the issue of human dignity. And echoing one of your thoughts here, a question from one of our voting panel's members, Nadige Bizimungu in Qatar, asks a question to William. She says, you talked about the need for capitalism and social equality, but how can those two ideas be compatible since capitalism inherently creates inequality?
Well, of course, you need government as well. That is absolutely right. Nobody is suggesting, I'm not suggesting unregulated markets and industries. We always have to have laws and regulations to prevent monopoly power. I gave the example of the minimum wage, and there's always a role for government. In fact, I think the real common ground in the debate is what Tabata just said about education. Which are the countries where people would love to live from many parts of the world? Germany, if they're in Europe, or Singapore, perhaps, if they're in the Far East. Countries that have very strong education systems, but these are capitalist countries that have the wealth to create those education systems. So that's why capitalism and social justice and opportunity can go together.
Can they go together? Another question here from our audience members, our voting panel from South Africa. Gina Sibanda is asking a question directed to Fatima. She asks, how do we ensure accountability in a socialist system in a developing country?
Well, I think in the same way we wish for it to happen in a capitalist country, you have to have a free press. You have to have a press that asks questions of its leaders, that doesn't simply put forward government talking points. And I think that's as possible in a socialist country as it is in a capitalist country. If you look at capitalist countries, their press is very problematic. You know, Rupert Murdoch decides a great amount of things. I don't think that's fair. It's not to say that capitalist countries have a free press and socialist ones don't. I think we have a problem with the free press in the world, and that's why it's easy for presidents such as Trump to malign the press. That's why something like fake news spreads as quickly as it does, because the press is really our defense. The press is our way of asking questions, our ability to put forward dissent. And we need that in any system, whether it's socialist, whatever, it doesn't matter. I think it's true that we have gotten caught up on the names here, but the mechanisms we want are the same thing, whether in one system or the other.
To this one for Tabata from Mohammed Shamir Ahmed from Pakistan. We have seen in countries like Pakistan that huge sums of wealth have been moved out of the country to global tax havens. Can socialist policies even work in a globalized world, he asks.
I'm speaking as someone who is 26 years old. We won't be able to fight global warming. We won't be able to find good solutions to the technological revolution. And we won't be able to combat this problem that you brought, that also affects Brazil, if we don't come to some sort of global government. But it's so hard to do when we have world leaders such as Trump. I know that we talk about him, but he does represent some of the things that I think are the worst in the country, in the world right now. When we have leaders that only look only to their countries and don't think about all those global problems, it's going to be really hard for us to solve them. So my hope are in the new generations, that we are able to find collaborative solutions to problems such as this. And I agree with you, Pakistan by himself and Brazil by itself will never be able to solve a problem such as this one.
A final quick question to William from our voting panel. This one is from Beatrice Zemelite from Lithuania. She asks, how will capitalism provide equal opportunities when it mainly gives opportunity for the rich to stay rich or even become richer?
Well, it provides equal opportunities if you have a good education system. And the strongest education systems in the world are generally in countries that have thriving market capitalist economies. Now, that is an obvious role for government. I came from Yorkshire in the north of England, and I went to a state school, what we call a comprehensive school here in the UK. I was given equality of opportunity. in a free enterprise society. And I think that's the way to do it. I haven't noticed much equality of schooling in socialist societies around the world. Fatima doesn't want us to talk too much about Venezuela, but you wouldn't want to try out your education in Venezuela over the next few years. You'd be much better in Germany or Britain or America or Singapore or Japan. And these are countries that have strong capitalist systems.
William, a quick yes or no follow-up. Would you agree that we need to tax the rich to make universal basic income happen? A question from one of our audience members as well. Do we need to tax the rich?
No. I eliminate tax havens and have a global carbon tax. But just taxing people to redistribute the money around, you end up with less money.
All right, so that's a resounding no. We won't be able to go any deeper on that one, so you're off the hook for now at least. Let's go straight into a second round of voting and see if our discussion has changed the minds of our voting panel in any significant way. But before we do that, let me quickly remind you all of the three different positions we heard today. Fatima Bhutto says we need to radically reimagine our current system. It has failed us and it is broken beyond repair. Tabata Amaralu says we need to look beyond these simplistic labels of socialism and capitalism, and we need to make policies that are based on evidence. And William Hague says we need less socialism. We must foster innovation and entrepreneurship instead. So after listening to our guests, has our voting panel's thinking shifted in any way? You can all join us as well in this debate by using the hashtag Doha Debates. Let us know what you think. And while you do, let's go back to Nelufar to see what is going on right now in cyberspace. Nelufar.
Thank you, Ghida. Let's have a quick look at our amazing 49 voting wall of opinion, just so I can see them as they're busily casting their votes, as Ghida has instructed. There you all are. A quick wave, because I can't tell if the screen's frozen or not. Where are you guys? Hello. Yes, do vote away. Whilst they're doing that, I'm going to tell you what the rest of the world has been saying. Eduardo Flores is watching on YouTube from San Antonio, Texas, and he wants to address Lord Hague specifically, wants to know, he wants to know, what should the goal of society and civilization be? Is it to create wealth or to be advancing and improving society? Someone with the handle TheInvestor20 says the socialists in Pakistan will disagree, but this is the biggest socialist government we've had so far. The problem, however, remains the same. The government is running a deficit and everything is done on borrowing. Now, someone calling themselves Mummy and Moo on Twitter in the UK says instead of raising taxes, agreeing with Lord Hague there, which the government might ineffectively use, a percentage of the earnings should be given to local community groups. So this idea of moving away from big socialist governments and to local government policies that can specifically target an action change. That's a really interesting one. Connor McMullen from Miami Beach, amazing, says, why don't we rebrand the whole concept? Something that Tabata was saying. Socialism and all the other isms of previous generations have stigmas attached to them. Let's use the best ideas from each and modernize them for today's world. I have to say, our online audience and our wall of virtual voters vary considerably. Those people who are voting and sharing their opinions on Twitter and YouTube very much seem to think that socialism and socialist policies are not the way. In fact, the question that I raised earlier that our wonderful digital team had posed to our Instagram followers, would you support permanently raising taxes on the rich, yielded a 76% yes. What's interesting to note was that was in response to a recent open letter written by 800 millionaires and billionaires who signed it to say, yes, please do tax us more. I wonder what Lord Hague makes of that. Ghida.
Interesting. And then let's see how all this lines up with our results as well. Let's put up the original results first, and we'll be able to compare both. So the first round of voting showed us these results, where we had the position espoused there by Fatima get the most resonance, have the most resonance amongst our viewership and garner the most votes, 44%, 37% for Tabata and 18% for William Hague. Has anything shifted after you all heard them elaborate their positions and flesh out their arguments? Let's look at the current vote, and here it is. Well, there is a shift at least among Tabata and Fatima's positions there. We need to radically reimagine our current system, 43%. 42% now agree with Tabata that we do live in a very complex society, which calls for a complex set of solutions, neither radical to the right nor to the left. William Hague, I'm afraid, still there at 14%. So not much movement at your end. So have members of our voting panel change their minds? These are the results. When we started our discussion, though, we talked about the growing trend among young people in different countries who are leaning more and more towards socialism. If we do move beyond these labels of capitalism and socialism, as Tabata says, what we have is this continuum where the two extreme ends of the spectrum can and do often coexist. What we also have is a genuine cry for help, though, and we must not forget that. Too many young people are desperately looking for answers, for a way out of this crisis, for jobs and opportunities. They're looking for stability and, above all, for human dignity. So how do we answer their cry for help? How do we move beyond our ideological differences? Fatima, in your final thoughts, how has this crisis changed your outlook? What words of advice, what commitments can you make? And what advice do you have for people who still want to believe in a better, more compassionate future?
I think that we have a generation of people committed deeply to a more compassionate, more just future. And I think that this pandemic has made very clear that while governments and countries might be xenophobic and raising barriers against people, we as people want to be connected. We understand our fates are connected. And our only way out of this is going to be together. And we have to follow that, whatever we want to call it.
All right. The way forward is sticking together. Tabata, for young students growing up in Brazil or any other part of the world and who still base their identity on a label, be it socialist, capitalist, or something else, what personal wisdom can you share from your own experience? What steps can they take to move beyond this ideological divide?
Well, education, science. So all the answers that we are looking for, they can come from science. They can come if we invest in education. And I agree with the two of them when we say that we need a strong education system to combat inequalities and to make the world more fair. So I'm sure that in the future, things are going to be better. And I hope that young people get more and more involved with politics, because this is the place for us to transform things.
Thank you, Tabata. William, what would you tell today's 16-year-olds, all the young people watching today who are disillusioned with the current systems we have, who feel let down, but who still believe that there can be a better future, not just for themselves, though, for all those around them as well?
Well, I'd say the real test of whether what we're doing is worthwhile is, are we addressing the needs of the whole planet? Are we saving the planet, in particular, from climate change? And this should be guiding our policies, not talking about socialism or necessarily defending capitalism. It is making sure that we are doing that. That's why I talk about a global carbon tax. And yes, certainly we need a lot more global cooperation.
All right, a great note to end on. William Hague, Tabata Amaralu, and Fatima Bhutto, let me thank you all for joining us today. It's been wonderful to hear your insights as we continue to grapple with the devastating consequences of a pandemic that has really made us rethink the kind of world we all want to live in. And thank you to the Doha Debates team, as always, our correspondent Nelufar and our connector Govinda, and to everyone who joined us online. And thank you, of course, as always, to Qatar Foundation for bringing us all together. Let's continue this conversation online, on Instagram, on YouTube, on Twitter, using the hashtag #DearWorld@Doha We hope you'll join us for our next debate. Until then, from me, Ghida Fakry, and the entire Doha Debates team, thank you all for being with us.